Hi. So I like that song too. We are going to do chapter 18 and 19 today, and you will have a writing assignment. And I'm just finding my notes here as always. And your writing assignment is going to be to create a comic strip of a situation that has happened to you before. It can be something that's happened to you during this quarantine since you've been home. It could be something that's happened to you before this whole thing happened. Basically, you're going to be the character in the comic strip. You'll be the main character, okay? And you're going to describe the events of the situation. So, an experience in your life. So maybe you want to write about learning to play a sport or a music, or maybe you want to write about something that happened to you at home. Maybe you got in an argument with a sibling over the computer or over a book or a game or something. And I want you to do a comic strip like in frames. Okay. So you can draw squares if you want, you can cut it, you can make a book like a chunky comic. A lot of kids did that last year. Depending on what you have at home, it can be a whole size, it can be a little tiny thing, however you want to do it, with the events, what happened at the beginning, the middle, and the end, just like an essay, but in a comic. So not complete. I mean, I guess you could have complete sentences, dialogue. You'll have quotation marks, lots of dialogue, characters talking to each other. Set the scene, pictures. Every single one needs to have a picture. You do not have to color it if you don't have that at home. I know there are some coloring utensils at the school. If you need to pick those up there, you can. So make sure that you have a sequence, you have transitional words, the reader will understand what's going on, and then it needs to be solved at the end. It doesn't have to be, 20 frames. It can be 5, 10, however you want to do it. Okay. So that will be your writing assignment when we're done with this. So we are on page 171, complicated. 3 minutes after Morris showed Greg the book club flyer, they rushed into Mr. Z's room, and Morris said, "Mr. Z, we've got to ask you something." Startled, Mr. Z looked up from the quizzes he was grading. "Oh, sure, about math," he said hopefully. Greg shook his head. "Look," he put the flyer on the teacher's desk and pointed at the book of Garfield comics. "How come it's okay for kids to buy books like that here at school, but it's not okay for us to sell our mini comic books?" Now it's going to get real. Mr. Z picked up the flyer and flipped through it. He had seen packets of these in the office by the teacher mailboxes, but they always went to the reading and language arts teachers, never to him. Very interesting. "So," said Maura, "does the book club have," and there's an illustration there at the top, just real simple pencil sketch, "for the school committee or something?" Mr. Z nodded. "I guess they must." Morris said, "Well, that's not fair, because our comics aren't so different from some of these books, and they're selling them right here at school. Here, take a look at this." Mara had borrowed back her new copy of The Lost Unicorn from Allison, and she handed it to Mr. Z. "Greg and I finished it this weekend, and I know it's not supposed to be here at school, but it's been hidden away all day, and I just wanted you to see it, because it's good, and it's not even violent." Mr. Z began to thumb through the comic. The drawings were exceptional, especially for the student work. Remembering Mrs. Davenport had glanced toward his doorway, and then clicked flippantly through the rest of the pages. Maura was right. There was less violence in this comic book than there was in a lot of classic fairy tales. And looking at the credits on the back cover, he saw that these two former enemies had apparently worked together. Mr. Z smiled and nodded his approval, and immediately Morris said, "So we want special permission, too, like the book clubs, to sell our comics. Who should we talk to?" Mr. Z looked from Morris' face to Greg's. He could see there was no point in trying to talk them out of this. He took a deep breath and decided to try anyway. "Well, the school committee has a meeting once a month, but the principals of each school are always at the meetings, and you already know how Mrs. Davenport feels about comic books." Then, handing the little book back to Mara, he said, "And please, put that away," turning to 174. "But what about these comics?" said Greg, pointing at the flyer again. "She's letting these be bought at and sold at school, so that's not fair." Mr. Z nodded. I'm not saying you're wrong. I'm just telling you that what you're asking is, well, it's complicated. Mr. Z pulled a handful of papers from the inbox on his desk, flipped through 5 or 6 sheets, and then said, "The school committee meets this Thursday night at 7:30 in the municipal building, and I guess if you wanted to go and talk to them, there's nothing stopping you. But it's complicated." Greg shook his head. "You keep saying complicated. Complicated. Why? We're just asking for the same deal the book club is getting. What's so complicated about that?" "Well," said Mr. Z, "for one thing, book clubs are big companies, and I know they have teachers and librarians and reading experts working for them, helping to pick the books. And on back of the flyer, here it says the teachers get free books for their classrooms when they send in the orders. So the book clubs help teachers. Plus, they're helping kids learn and getting them excited about reading and books. And you're just a couple kids who want to sell some little comics and maybe make some money." Greg said, "But aren't the book clubs making money?" Mr. Z nodded. "I'm sure they are." "So there's still no difference," said Greg. "And we can give away free copies of our comics to teachers, too. That's not a problem." "Yeah," said Maura, and we'll even give some of our profits to the school library fund. 10% of our profits for buying new library books." "What?" said Greg. The girl was giving money away. His money. Maura ignored him. "So what do you think, Mr. Z?" "Don't you think we have a chance?" "Well, I suppose," he said. "Great," said Maura, "because I already told Greg how on Friday you said you could help us with business stuff. So this is great. What should we do first?" Mr. Z gulped. "Oh, you mean, well, I really didn't think I could. Mr. Z looked from Maura's face to Greg's and then back to Maura's, and he saw there was no way out. 176. So he decided to stall for time. "Well, I guess. First, I better do a little thinking. All of us should. And you should both talk to your parents about this, because they ought to know what you're thinking about doing. So how about we all take some time, and then we get together again to compare our notes. How's that sound?" Maura made a face. "Sounds slow, because the school committee meeting is Thursday night, so we have to meet again tomorrow, before school, like at 7:30. Greg nodded. "Before school. Okay, Mr. Z. See you tomorrow." They're pretty pushy, huh? And both kids turned and rushed out, Greg to soccer practice and Maura to catch her bus. Since sitting there on the desk, Mr. Z felt like he'd been run over by a couple of go-karts. He tried to remember what he'd been doing only 2 minutes earlier. Oh, yes, grading quizzes. He picked up his red pen. But Mr. Z couldn't concentrate, and even the peace and quiet of room 27 didn't help. Sure, it was calm and orderly now, but he had an uneasy feeling, like the kind that comes just before a storm. Chapter 19. I'll see if I can get through it before it cuts me off. On Tuesday morning, Mr. Z sat in his room, secretly hoping that Greg and Maura wouldn't show up, hoping something might have derailed their plan. Like maybe a big no from somebody's mom or dad, or maybe a sudden outbreak of common sense, or even a flat tire on a school bus, something, anything. But at exactly 7:30, Maura walked into the math room and said, "Hi, Mr. Z." She sat at a desk and began digging around in her backpack. She pulled out a pencil and then a new spiral notebook. She opened it to the first page and carefully wrote the date and the time. She looked up at Mr. Z and said, "I'm going to keep a record of our meeting." About a minute later, Greg walked in. Maura looked at him and said, "You're late. It's not businesslike to be late." She turned and wrote something in her notebook. "Turn your page." Greg made a face at the back of her head. Turning to Mr. Z, he said, "So what do we do first?" Mr. Z said, "First, I need to know what your parents think about all of this." Greg said, "Mine are fine with it, with talking to the school committee and everything. They're going to come to the meeting. At least my dad is, for sure. And my mom's going to try to cancel another meeting she has for Thursday. But they both think it's fine, especially after I showed them the flyer from the book club." Maura nodded. "My parents think it's okay too. Only my mom more than my dad. He thinks it's sort of crazy, but they both said to thank you for helping, and they're both coming to the meeting too." Mr. Z took a deep breath and let it out slowly. Now there was truly no way out. He felt trapped. He honestly wanted to help these kids, and he honestly saw nothing wrong with either their comic books or their wish to make them available to their friends. It even seemed okay to make a little money, but sometime soon he knew he would have to talk to the principal. Next page, look at the picture with his face and then a little think bubble of them. Mr. Z had spent most of his life carefully avoiding disagreements and disputes. First in grade school, and then right through high school, college, and graduate school, he had learned to keep away from the controversy, because any situation that might include yelling could easily lead to pushing, and pushing sometimes led to all sorts of unpleasantries, even BLOOD. But this current situation had conflicts written all over it. He certainly didn't imagine that Mrs. Davenport was going to haul off and sock him in the nose or anything. But he thought of the thought of facing her and explaining his involvement in this business, his hands began to sweat. Then Mr. Z had a good thought. Another way out, he said. Well, one thing I have to do as soon as possible is call the superintendent's office and ask if they have any room on the agenda for Thursday's meeting. We might, turn the page to 180, need to wait a month. Maybe we're too late, but maybe we're not. Morris said, so I think we should go ahead and get ready anyway. Greg nodded. Yeah, like we need a whole plan of what to say and who says what, because we really have to look like we know what we're doing. I bet they won't even listen to us. Then I think I should talk first, Morris said, because I know exactly what we want to ask permission for. Greg snorted. You? Why you? I know what we want. The whole thing was my idea. Remember? I should talk first. Your idea, said Maura. I was the one who saw the book club flyer, and when I showed it to you, you didn't even see the point till after I told you. So don't start acting like this is all about you. Oh, now they're going back to the way they were before, aren't they? Oh, right, Greg said, because everybody knows that you're such a great... Wham! Mr. Z slapped his right hand flat on his desk. Enough. I thought you two had gotten past this. And if you haven't, then just get up and leave, both of you. Oopsie. After a few seconds of silence, Greg said, sorry. I mean, if everyone wants more to talk first, that's fine with me. And Morris said, no, it's okay. I don't have to talk first. That was stupid. Greg thought, yeah, really stupid. But he kept his eyes on Mr. Z's face because he knew that without the math teacher's help, this idea was going nowhere. Glad to see the immediate change in attitude and pleased with himself for being so forceful, Mr. Z became the self-appointed chairperson of their little meeting. For the next 25 minutes, they had a lively, friendly exchange of ideas, and Maura took furious notes. And they don't mean furious like mean, they mean like she was really writing fast. And Mr. Z actually enjoyed himself. True, there was a dull ache in his right hand from whacking his desk, but the plan that started taking shape didn't seem crazy or dangerous or hopeless. It isn't. In its own weird way, it made perfect sense. As the bell rang for homeroom, Maura believed that she might actually get the chance to have all of the other kids at school read her stories and see her artwork. Mr. Z believed that the clear, almost mathematical logic of the proposal might actually convince the school committee that this was a good idea. And Greg believed that maybe, just maybe, Chunky Comics might actually make him a whole bunch of money. So in that chapter, they have a plan, and they're putting it to the test. So they're going to write what they're going to say, have it all mapped out, and then we don't know the outcome yet. So your task is to write a comic, can be however long you want it to be, but it has to give good examples of the characters, what they're discussing. So you'll have quotation marks, dialogue. You need a problem and a solution. So instead of writing it in an essay with 5 paragraphs, you're going to do little frames, okay, comic strip frames. So if you want to jot down your ideas, what's going to happen first, next, then, and last, and maybe do 2 frames for the beginning, 2 or 3 or 4 for the middle, and then 2 more for the end, if that helps you. So it's going to be an event that you're familiar with, that you've gone through. It can be in first person I, or you can have the narrator telling your story. Okay, so I hope that makes sense. And I hope we get together again soon so I can read them. So keep track of it. Again, if you want to Google Doc it, you can do that to me. I'm here. Looking forward to hearing from you guys. And I hope you have a great day. And I love you. See you next time. Bye.